Hi, welcome to Spotlight, your story, their lifeline, a mother-to-mother podcast. I'm Mimi.
And I'm Dobra, and together we are your hosts. In this mother-to-mother podcast, you will meet women sharing their stories of struggle, triumph, and hope. Our aim is to ensure that no woman ever feels alone.
Through their brave storytelling, these women become lifelines for others on their own journeys. So join us as we dive into the incredible stories that inspire and empower.
Welcome to Spotlight, where your story becomes a lifeline.
Thank you to all the sponsors that have helped us create awareness on many different sensitive topics. We love collaborating with organizations and businesses to help with our mission. So please reach out to us if you would like to sponsor an episode. Thank you to this month's episode sponsor, Banim, Clothes Store, and the Helpline.
Okay, Mimi, have you started Pesach cleaning?
Yep, I have.
Started Pesach cooking?
Well, is menu planning counted?
Yeah, it's a good start. You stocked up the kids' wardrobes?
Well, that's a good question.
For all of us, Pesach is an overwhelming time and kitting out the kids can seem, well, just a little stressful. So Banim is your perfect one-stop shop with a gorgeous selection of weekday, Shabbos and Simcha wear for your boys and girls.
And with sizes ranging from babies to young teens, upscale and trendy styles with modest price tags, there is literally something for everyone. And you know, Dobra, what is so special about Banim? Is their family coordinated clothing, like boy, girl, baby. How cute! And
That's
their
cute.
exquisite girls' wedding dresses, seriously stunning stuff. You'll just love their unique Banim and dinky designs.
That sounds amazing. Okay, let's talk return policies. They offer 24-hour return and 1-week exchange policy. That's not bad.
Really not bad.
So you can visit them at their Stamford Hill branch on 228 Stamford Hill Road or at their Hendon branch on 112 to 114 Brent Street through the Chabad back entrance.
Hello, we can't forget, you can also pop next door to Ziggy, where you'll find the cutest baby girls and Shabbos PJs for your little ones, plus comfortable, pretty robes for your young daughters and teens. And just one of the most amazing beauties about Ziggy's, apart from just having the most gorgeous clothes, is that they have sizes running to like size 24. How cool.
Wow. Banim are known for their excellent customer service, but hey, come and check it out for yourself.
And you better hurry because sizes are literally flying off the shelves.
Okay, Mimi, next.
Okay, I need to tell you about our new sponsor that is so significant for this episode.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Go on.
Okay, well, you know how we're all about acts of kindness, chesed, and creating support systems where they're needed most, just like our podcast.
Yeah.
So our new sponsor, the Helpline, embodies that ethos. Established in 2019, they stepped up to address mental health challenges within the Jewish community in the UK.
That's amazing. That's really remarkable. But what exactly do they offer?
So they provide a 24/7 phone and chat service, offering a compassionate ear for anyone in our community who's struggling.
Wow.
Basically ensuring that no one has to face their difficulties alone.
Wow. But opening up about mental health issues can be really, really daunting, especially with societal stigmas attached. So how do they overcome that?
You're absolutely right. And that is why the Helpline ensures that everything is completely anonymous, allowing the caller to share their struggles without fear of judgment. Sometimes, Dobra, all it takes is a listening ear to make a difference.
That's incredible. That is really, really incredible and so reassuring. So callers can reach out anonymously and be heard without any fear of stigma.
Exactly that. And since their inception, they've expanded from a limited service to a crucial 24/7 lifeline. Do you know that they have a team of over 100 trained volunteers from around the world that are always there to lend an empathetic ear?
Wow. Okay, so having volunteers also from diverse backgrounds must help maintain that anonymity.
Yeah, it really does. And by having men and women volunteer from various sectors of the community also ensures that callers feel comfortable and understood. You know, they receive up to 2,000 calls and chats every month, which is really highlighting the pressing need for this service.
Yeah, it's clear there's a real demand for what they offer, and the fact that it's also anonymous allows people to be themselves without any fear.
Right, exactly. And being completely anonymous is the core of their mission, ensuring callers retain their dignity while seeking support. This approach is especially vital within the Jewish community, where mental health issues can often carry a heavy stigma.
It's incredibly inspiring to see their commitment to the message, never struggle alone, which aligns perfectly with the theme of this episode. They're truly making a difference and saving lives every single day. So if you or someone you know is struggling, don't hesitate to reach out to the helpline at 0330 127 3333. Welcome to Spotlight. This is a very, very special episode. It all started with an emotional letter to the volunteers of Mother to Mother from Jordana, sharing how Mother to Mother support helped her through an extremely difficult postpartum. She's come today to share her experience with postpartum anxiety in general, and the importance of accepting and surrounding yourself with support in vulnerable times. Anxiety is so common, a huge amount of women suffer with it in some form. And we're so grateful that you are agreeing to share such a private and painful period of your life. And we hope that through this, many of our listeners will feel validated and continue to create awareness. So welcome.
It's so exciting to have you on.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Jordana, you came on as not anonymous. Can you tell us how and why you came to that decision?
So to be honest with you, I really feel that the issue is primarily one of secrecy and shame, that we don't have a space, particularly in a community where we have lots of children. We don't have a space to share the reality of how difficult it can be. So I decided that if I went anonymous, it would really just be counter to everything I was coming to do here, which was to take away the stigma and the shame, and to create, or to start creating, along with your podcast, which is what you're doing, a space for women to share freely and not feel judged.
And as Dobra said, this is such a common struggle that women go through. And it's really special of you to come on and do this. So if you could just please introduce yourself and tell us briefly about your life and marriage and pregnancies leading up to when you started dealing with anxiety.
Okay, hi. So I'm Jordana. I am a wife, mother, therapist, daughter, friend, and also on the side I do cleaning, cooking, chauffeuring, nursing, depending on the season. So I'm an all-rounded mum, I would say.
Is that part of the mothering?
Yes,
or as a career?
I think it's a career, and I think it's important to introduce myself and for all of us to kind of acknowledge that we as mothers have two careers. I'm a therapist, but I'm also a mum, and a mum is probably the more stressful of the two careers, definitely. And I think it's important for us as mothers and mothers out there listening, and fathers, to acknowledge that, to acknowledge the kind of the high stress levels. In fact, I just read, I can't remember who conducted the study, but they compare the stress levels of mothers to like really high stress jobs. So like first responders, people in the armed forces, that the brain and body experience of a mother is on par with that. So when you compare that to like an accountant, or a therapist, there are relatively low level stressful experiences. So that is what mothering can be.
I love that.
So that's a bit of context.
So
that's very validating. It really is.
Oh, thank you.
Good, yes.
So when I'm at home tonight, I'm going to be like, I am a top sergeant.
For sure. And you don't have a break. You get no paid leave. You get no holiday. And you're on the clock in your brain 24/7. You're constantly thinking, and you go to bed at night and you're like, I've got to sort out this kid's issue and make Shabbos and do 8 loads of laundry tomorrow. And it's just non-stop. So I think giving that context at the beginning is so important, because it's not a surprise really that anxiety grows in that sort of environment, right? So I got married very young, pretty much straight out of SEM, and got pregnant very quickly, thank God. And then I'd say that was the beginning of sort of my mental health journey with anything baby related. That first pregnancy was my first experience of sort of a deep depression. I'd kind of had like periods on and off in my teenage years, but nothing like this. This was sort of that constant low mood, not wanting to get out of bed, not really wanting to do much. And that lasted for the whole of, I'd say, the first trimester. Then I got a bit of a break. And then after she was born, quite quickly, the baby blues kind of kicked in. Obviously, I was very young. I was just 20 and we were living in Israel, very isolated in that sense. And I didn't really know that it was a problem, really. I just remember sort of kind of counting back days, like she was 21 days old. 21 days ago, my life was like this, and now it's like this. And I was just trying to process these new feelings and thinking maybe they're normal, maybe they're not. And also being very young and not wanting to kind of own that there was anything wrong and tell anyone, because everything was meant to be perfect. And I think, you know, that was, how old am I? That was 15 years ago. And within our community, it still wasn't so accepted to speak about it openly, right? You didn't really, and people weren't doing what you're doing and spreading awareness. So we didn't necessarily have the language. I didn't have the language to even explain to myself what might have been going on.
Did you think that it was depression in your head?
Not until it lifted.
And your husband, did he?
He had, poor guy, he was 22, you know, straight out of the frum world. And again, there's no education. Right. So he probably just thought, and I think there's probably many frum men out there that are like, I've just married a nutcase, or I've married
oh no,
you know, I just married, like, what is wrong? They probably go to like Kola and they're like, women are so strange, like what's wrong with them? That's definitely going to have changed, I would imagine, now for young men dating, that there's a little bit more awareness, hopefully. But yeah, for both of us, there was no understanding. Is it the marriage? Is it living in a different country? Is it being away from family? Is it all of that? Is it the hormones? So many different aspects, but all the while being in this, I guess, this kind of isolation, in the sense that we didn't feel that it was something we would talk about to anyone, and even with each other necessarily. I don't know if we named it, but when I was about 5.5 months postpartum, we came back to London for Pesach, and I was with family again, and it was such a healing experience. Suddenly all of that just lifted, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've just come out of this cloud of like, something was wrong. It was miserable and I felt awful, and that isn't normal. And just being with family and with friends and, you know, familiar things like Tesco and driving, you know, all of that.
The life you know.
Exactly. Coming home, I'd call it, really for me was very, very healing.
It shows how important having a support around you is.
Yeah.
Whether it's family or friends, everyone's circumstances are different, what talks to them.
For sure.
But you were alone in a different country with no one, with your husband, Baruch Hashem, but other than that, and then you come home and it just just lifts.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
100%. It's like being connected to oxygen again.
Wow.
And for some women it can be work, for other women it can be, you know, going to a show, whatever it is, but it's just making sure that you're breathing. And I wasn't. It was just sort of surviving, and there's a big difference. So that was kind of the first experience, I'd say, with sort of, I'd call it perinatal mental health, because really it can be pregnancy, it can be after, it's not just postpartum. And then I got pregnant again fairly quickly. So my oldest was about 20 months when my second was born. And I definitely felt a lot more confident and a lot more, you know, aware. I'd say, like, I always say to people, the first baby is like being hit by a bus. Like your whole world just crashes around you and you have to like figure out how to pick up the pieces. But baby number two, I for me at least, was, in that regard, it wasn't as much of a shock to the system. And I'd say for the first kind of 2 weeks, I actually had this period of like, oh, I'm not going to have that again. I'm feeling really confident. This baby's really placid. She sleeps loads and I'm feeling okay. And then when she was about 4 to 6 weeks old, she developed what could only be described as like the worst case of colic known to mankind. I mean, anyone who knows us as a family would agree. I'm not being dramatic. She just screamed and screamed and screamed like the whole time, and our neighbors could hear. And my family who was staying with us at the time were like, oh my goodness, I don't know how. My mum was the only one who could deal with it. She was just so wonderful with newborns, and it didn't matter how much they screamed. Everyone else was like a bit like, oh, take it away.
So you were home at that point?
No, I was, sorry, she'd come out because she was born, this baby was born in June. So they came out around that time, 6 weeks later for the summer holidays here. They came to Israel. And that was an incredibly, incredibly difficult experience. I could go into lots of stories. If you want to do a reflux episode, I will come back. Because reflux is horrendous and so stressful for anyone out there that's dealing with it. Go and get help. There are things that can be done. So that was an almost 18-month experience. It went from sort of the early experience of lots and lots of screaming. When that passed, when she was about 4 months old, she then developed like projectile vomiting. And so she was a really happy child, but she vomited 4 or 5 times a day everywhere. It wasn't just like a little bit, it was like across the room bucket type.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was her. And then when she went on solids, she got even worse because there was more to come out, and she couldn't tolerate like any texture in her food at all. So once she started crawling and was eating crumbs off the floor, it was just, that was my day. Just like, she'd vomit, I'd clean it up, I'd do the laundry, I'd get changed, I'd change her, and repeat.
And you had a toddler.
And I had a toddler, yeah. And she just took it as normal, like, oh, she's being sicky again.
Oh no.
So it was stressful. Everywhere I went, every supermarket, every park, every Shabbos meal, I just knew that was going to happen. And it really, I laugh about it now. My family laughs. I think they called her like the rainbow baby, because like this rainbow would literally come out of her mouth across the room of all different colours.
So rainbow babies have a few different meanings.
Yes,
apparently.
I think this was before that was so well known, that term. So maybe we could call it something else. But that really, really took its toll on my mental health. I don't even know if I had postpartum something, or it was just the stress.
It's exhausting.
Exhausting and stressful and just never ending. And also then the medical side, like trying to figure out what's wrong with her and going to doctors and then being like, you're eating, because I was breastfeeding, you're eating the wrong things, and then you're feeding her the wrong things, and no answers, no help at all. I think at the time Israel was quite far behind in the reflux acknowledgement, whereas in the UK it was a little bit better. So by the end of that sort of 18-month period where she'd started to get a little better, so let's say like four vomits a day instead of 10, I was just on the floor. And our marriage was as well, because we'd literally spent a year and a half just trying to keep afloat, dealing with a toddler and with this very, very special baby. She really is. She's a really, really special soul, but her medical issues were really taxing on us. And so that is significant because I got pregnant again, as we do, when she was 2, just before she was 2. And in fact, when she was watching me vomit in the toilet, it was like so exciting for her. She's like, Mummy's being sick too.
We're twins.
Oh, no. She's finally found her place, like someone else she can relate to.
My dad's always like, we're matching.
Yeah. It was like her, I just remember like her eyes, like, wow.
When anything's matching, not
no,
not in that way.
Yeah, she felt at home finally, like someone else does this too. I'm not the only strange human.
It's nice that you can laugh about it now, because really, it must have been super, super challenging at the time.
Yeah.
So she was 2 years old and still vomiting.
Yeah. And it went on until she was about 4. There were certain foods she couldn't eat. And I remember the first day she could tolerate an apple with skin on and not vomit. I was like so excited. I sent a picture to my family group. It was like a milestone. I felt like crying. So that was incredibly stressful. By that point, by the way, I'd already had my third.
Did they ever diagnose?
Reflux. I'm sure there was something else.
You can have a baby.
I mean, I think you can have reflux as an adult. It's just becomes more like
but so
heartburn.
extreme.
Yeah,
like that,
they did medicate it. It got better as she got older and bigger, I suppose.
Right.
I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't know that it can go on.
Yeah,
like,
neither did I.
Extreme.
And someone out there's probably gonna be like, no, that wasn't reflux, that was. But she's okay now, thank God.
Wow.
She's fine. But it definitely like stunted her growth. You can see she's different to my other kids. They're all like quite robust kids, and she's much more petite, because she really didn't have much nutrition in those first 2 years. There was so little she could keep down. So it's definitely had, in some ways, a sort of lasting impact. But otherwise, no, thank God she's a healthy, very happy, full of life little thing.
Amazing.
So I got pregnant again with baby number 3. And at the same time, we were looking to move back to leave Israel to do Kiruv outside of Israel. And I think the combination of kind of the uncertainty of what was going to be during this pregnancy, because it was almost definite that we were going to be moving in the middle of it, where we were going to end up, combined with the experience that I'd just gone through with number 2, triggered my first ever episode with anxiety. So I'd never ever had anxiety before. Obviously I'd had worry, before a school test or whatever. I'd never ever felt anxiety. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I must have been about 5 months pregnant. I just woke up like gasping for breath. I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing. I was convinced something was wrong, obviously, because I was pregnant. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm having a heart attack. This is so dangerous. What's happening? I woke up my husband, who's quite calm by nature in that regards. And he wasn't, as scared as I was, but I was really scared. I genuinely didn't understand what was happening to me.
So just repeat, how exactly did you feel at that time? Because I'm imagining this was a panic attack.
Yeah, for sure it was a panic attack.
Yeah.
So I remember just sort of like, I must have been asleep. I remember like shooting up in bed, like gasping, and then not being able to breathe. And my heart was racing, cold sweat, all of the kind of panic attack symptoms, but I had no idea. I didn't even know what panic attack was. And I was convinced something was wrong. And I think I said to my husband, like, go and get me juice. Maybe I've got like low blood sugar or something because I was pregnant, and that did help. But then it's sort of happened a couple more times.
How long did that first panic attack last for? About
we're going back like 10 years now.
Oh gosh.
I don't
are you
remember.
saying like a minute or like
it probably felt a lot longer than it was. Yeah, I don't remember, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But that then they kind of came back a couple of times. Then we did end up leaving Israel. We came to a job somewhere in the UK. And I hadn't wanted to leave Israel. So it was very much like kicking and screaming, didn't want to come, didn't want to leave. So there was a lot of grief around, anyone who's moved back. There's definitely a grieving process for many people, leaving that life, leaving the country. So there was that going on. And then she was born in a new system. Now, obviously, I grew up in the UK, but I'd had my first 2 babies in Shari Tzedek. That was my system. I understood it. And now I'm in the NHS and it's very different. Yeah. And we were not in London. We were quite far away. So again, without that support system. And my mum came for the end of the pregnancy. She was a teacher, so it must have been half term. And she was going to be there just, to have that person to be with the other kids, to sort of be there when you got back from the hospital, whatever it was. Also, I'd gone from having 3 whole days in Shari Tzedek where they take care of you to nothing here. And that really was quite a worry for me. So she came out and I was already way overdue, which is another thing I do. I like to go late with everything, including births. I was booked to be induced on that Monday and on the Friday. So we all as a family would call my grandfather, who lived alone in Bournemouth, and no one had been able to get through to him. No one had heard from him. So just before Shabbos, my mum called his block caretaker and said, look, we haven't heard from him. Can you check on him? This is the number of the shul caretaker where we are. Just can you call and let us know? And so on Friday night, I was home with my mum and my 2 girls, and my husband and the shul rabbi came, and basically my grandfather had a stroke and he'd been found on the floor by the caretaker of the building. And so my mum just jumped straight into a taxi and went to Bournemouth. Wow. And she needed to do that. 100% needed to be with her father. But for me, it was like this kind of abandonment. Like, now what's going to be with me? Who's going to be here? How's this going to work out? What if I go into labour tomorrow? We're in this strange place with no family. So that was quite an anxious, experience, to say the least. Plus, I was very close with my grandfather. So dealing with that duality was difficult.
The worry of what's going on with your grandfather's health, as well as
for sure
about to give birth.
Yeah.
Alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Without support, and you've just got two other
kids, and it's not like we're living in Edgware, we've got friends to pick up the pieces. It was very much isolated. It was a Kirov type community, so we just didn't have that.
And mother to mother wasn't around yet.
Mother to mother wasn't around that, and they definitely wouldn't have driven the 5-6 hours to get to.
Oh wow, it was literally 5-6 hours from
away.
London.
Yeah, it was far.
Wow, okay.
So you were really alone.
Yeah, and by nature I'm a bit of a lone wolf. Like, I don't mind being alone. It doesn't stress me out. But postpartum is, like, for me, the most vulnerable time, and I need to be with people. So during that period, so obviously I had the baby, thank God she was healthy. My grandfather was transferred to a hospital really for the last kind of 3 months.
Can I just backtrack to the pregnancy? You had one panic attack.
Yes.
Was that it for the whole pregnancy, or did it happen a few times?
So as it progressed, as the pregnancy progressed, I had a couple more, but it really took off when we moved back and we were settling into this new place. It then sort of morphed into not just panic attacks, but just anxiety in general. So
did you mention this to your midwife? Because then under NHS, then you've got a midwife.
No, because did I know what it was? No.
Well, yeah. So what were you calling them at the time? You just told your husband, I'm having these symptoms again?
I thought it was a physical issue. I thought it was a physical health issue.
You mean that as the pregnancy goes on, like your lungs are being affected or something like that?
Yeah,
that
like
kind
maybe
of
my heart's not coping with the pregnancy. Like everything must have been physical. Maybe it's a thyroid issue, but not once did I ever click that it was mental health, because I'd never experienced it before. Had I been depressed, I would have been able to, by that point, say, okay, I know what this is. This is familiar, hi old friend. But anxiety was like this new creature I'd never met, and I didn't have any understanding at that point of what it was, and I was convinced that I was physically unwell. And that kind of accelerated after she was born. I went through a couple of very difficult personal experiences after she was born, which really triggered a little bit of trauma response as well to those circumstances. But that combined with the anxiety from pregnancy continuing, I really would say that was anxiety on steroids for me.
You ended up giving birth yourself there?
Yeah.
And with no support? No one was there?
I had a doula from the nearest Jewish community. But no, otherwise that was it. Yeah. And it was a long, difficult labour, really long.
So then after birth, you had to go straight into suppering and cleaning.
Well, they kept me in
sorting.
for 3 days.
Okay.
So that was great.
Was there a reason for that?
That was because...
Was that due to the trauma?
No, why did they keep me in here? Because I had high blood pressure actually after the pregnancy. So immediately after I was going, I can't breathe, I can feel my heart. And they took it, and actually my blood pressure was quite high, but I had a lot of medication in the pregnancy. So they were not too concerned, but they wanted to monitor me. And also the baby was very big. So they sometimes like to just check there's no kind of health issues with the baby.
Did they take care of the baby in those 3 days?
No, not like Israel standards.
Right.
But to me, it felt safe, which again is very telling for me what I need after birth. It just felt safer to be in hospital, to be with, trained professionals, to have midwives. They were very kind there. It was a quieter area than London, so they actually had time to check on you and interact. And I definitely felt much, much safer there than once I left. And I remember that experience being in Israel as well. It was like that coming home and being like, oh my goodness, now what do I do? I'm alone. So having this difficult experience postpartum. So my anxiety went through the roof, like beyond anything I'd ever experienced, but I still didn't know.
Can you describe that?
Yeah. So physically, my body really expressed itself, in so many ways that now I understand more anxiety, but then I thought must have been physical health. So, getting dizzy, flashing lights, heart racing, feeling cold, feeling ill, not being able to walk too far, everything you could think of.
And this was constant?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was
So
pretty
were you
constant.
functioning?
I don't know. I mean, I was just about holding it together.
Right.
But suffering, I'd say. I think there's a big difference between surviving and living. I think we can survive very easily. Yeah. We go into survival mode, right? And that's what I'd say I was doing. The house was okay, the kids were okay, and they were very young, so I could get away with not being normal. Whereas
definitely.
now my kids can see it. My oldest was only 4, which made it a lot easier at the time. But yeah, it was just survival, really.
So it wasn't a one panic attack. It was like a constant.
It then became what they call kind of
constant
generalized anxiety. So it's like this constant experience. Like almost everything is coloured by this.
Did that spark some interest in getting some professional help?
You're like, when did that happen?
Yeah.
No,
when did you realise that this is not normal?
When did I realise this is not normal?
And please note, you were not a therapist at this point.
I was not a therapist at this point. I didn't really know.
Our listeners are probably thinking, she's a therapist. Yeah. She's not.
I was not a therapist. I don't know how much I even believed in mental health, if I'm really honest. Yeah, not necessarily because I was, anti it or any, stigma. It was just, I could not believe once I made the connection what a brain can do to the body, like what a traumatized or stressed or anxious brain can do to you physically. Because for me, my anxiety at that point was manifesting very much in a physical way, much more than like ruminating and thoughts. So for some people, it's much more of a mental process, like constantly thinking over, ruminating, things like that. For me, it was my body. It was all being expressed physically. Does that make sense? So it was much harder to kind of pinpoint that this was anxiety. So really, I'm going to try and condense that 4-year experience into a short and brief explanation of what I went through. It was having to go to therapy for some of the life circumstances. So that was probably like step 1. And going to doctor after doctor. And by this point, we'd moved to London, really because I had all taken a toll on me, and I needed to be nearer to home, nearer to friends, nearer to what I knew. But still, I'd say I was going to doctors for a good 2-3 years. I'm sure there's something wrong with me. Can you test me for this? Can you test me for that? Constantly coming up with new, Googling new illnesses, everything.
So this anxiety is why you had to move to London?
A couple of reasons. Some not related
it wasn't the sole
at all.
Reason.
But one of the reasons was definitely just I needed to be with people.
But it didn't have a name yet. You didn't yet know this was anxiety. And going from you were in therapy for traumas.
Yeah.
And you were seeing doctor after doctor for what? Like, what was that because of the anxiety? Things were coming up and you were like, what's going on with me?
I'm having a heart attack. I've got a brain tumor. I've got liver disease. Like I laugh about it now.
And it was really real.
I've got a parasite, anything that Dr. Google has on it, I had in my head, right? I didn't actually have it. Yeah. But it took, and I went to specialists and I went privately and I was like, somebody hear me, and I want to be mindful that there are people who aren't heard medically and it's an issue. There are real things going on and unfortunately are not taken seriously. But there's also a whole community of people who are going through anxiety and don't understand it. And the doctors are becoming a bit more versed in it, but there is a way of delivering it to someone, because I think a number of doctors may have tried to tell me, but when you think you're dying, you don't want to hear someone tell you it's all in your head, right?
Of course not.
That is so interesting. I totally hear what you're saying here, that you're going for real things that are in your head, and they're like, I think you just need to see a therapist.
Exactly.
And maybe you've just got an anxiety issue, and you're like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
I'm dying.
Exactly. I'm like, sure, I'll see a therapist if I'm alive, you know, like let's get to that point. But I'm done. And it took me a really long time, really the best part of 4 years, during which time I'd started my therapy training, to really truly come to terms with it, even with the beginning of my training and having had therapy and having understood that this maybe a part of me did not want to let go of the fact that maybe there was something really dangerous happening to me. And if I stopped believing myself, then that would be it, because nobody else believed me. So it was very difficult to come to terms with, for me at least.
Wow. So from baby number 3, there was a 4-year break.
Pretty much, yeah.
Where all this happened, and that you had all these unexplained illnesses, that you were running from doctor to doctor, and seeing a therapist for something completely different. Yeah. Maybe she also tried to tell you that perhaps you've got anxiety, but you didn't hear it at that time. And in that time, what made you start wanting to become a therapist yourself?
Having that experience.
Interesting. Wow.
So I'd always been the friend that could have the best DMCs, as they were called back then. I don't know what they're called now. A good listener.
Called DMCs.
People very naturally would open up to me. And I think a part of me had always wanted to do it, but felt like I have no life experience. Ironic, right? Hashem's like, I'll help you out.
Oh, goodness.
I had no life experience at the time, and I just thought I'll come back to it when I'm a bit more mature. And I just, this therapist that I had was unbelievable. She was incredible. She saved me. And this is more in the context of some other things that were going on for me. And I thought, I want to do this for other people. Like, this is such an amazing thing to do. And I also want to do this for my own development, because I can see this human being across from me is an evolved human. Like, she's done something that has moved her process and her growth so far beyond the average. I'm not saying that all therapists are like godly. That's not what I imply at all, but you're forced to grow in the study if you do it properly. So I applied to take a diploma. It's a 3-year advanced diploma, I think it was called. And even within that, I remember the first year, for some reason, the bathrooms in that training center would trigger my anxiety. I'd go in and I'd get really dizzy, and I'd feel really like out of place. And it's so, you know, even in that safe space, it was like, my gosh, this thing is really, it's just permeated like every area of my life. I'm kind of carrying it around with me, and I don't know if I'm ever going to get rid of it. I think by this point I'd started to come to terms with it, but I felt like this is it. This is my life now. I'm going to be this anxious person. And even little things. I remember once eating, I think I told you when we spoke, eating this kind of like peanut protein bar in a car on the way to pick up my kids from school, and suddenly my throat was swelling up and my tongue was swelling up, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having an anaphylactic reaction to peanuts, which was nonsense because I don't have a peanut allergy. But for some reason, something triggered my anxiety in that moment, and I was actually going to drive myself into Asda on the way to school and like run into the pharmacy and be like, I need an EpiPen. Thank God I didn't, because it would have been mortifying, right? I
mean, it actually
for
feels
real,
like...
I couldn't breathe. I felt my throat swelling up. I felt my tongue. I looked in the mirror. My tongue looked normal, but I felt it was bigger. So your brain is an incredibly powerful organ, right? And it can tell you all sorts of stories, which is, I think, relevant to this, where we're heading in the direction of this podcast, is how do we kind of undo anxiety in a sense.
So, yeah, I was going to ask that, like, is there medication, and like what?
By this point, I hadn't got deep enough into the world of anxiety to understand, but a friend of mine lent me this book called It's All in Your Head. I can't remember the author. And she is a doctor who works with patients who have all sorts of presenting diseases, but no physical root to any of them, some to the degree they're in wheelchairs. And she has done this kind of study through her patients of anxiety and the effects it has on your body physically, and that actually the root of the physical health issue is anxiety. And I'm not saying that's for everyone at all, but there is a subgroup of people in the medical world running to appointments in different specialist care who actually really need to be in the kind of psychotherapy, psychiatry world, because it's the brain that is
yes.
Is
I think what you're saying is that there are people that actually are ill,
100%,
and actually
Most
do
people,
have peanut allergies and do
sure.
have, unfortunately, other challenges, and those are real. But for some people, and also again, not for everyone within the anxiety world, for some people that are suffering with anxiety, then the brain is very powerful and can sort of mimic certain illnesses and say you have this and make it extremely real when it's not really true.
We'll be right back to this episode. Hi, I'm Danielle.
And I'm Aviva, and we are the founders of Mother to Mother, an organisation that supports and empowers women on their motherhood journeys. We offer a wide range of services to make sure that every mother can thrive, from emotional support services to mother and baby groups, practical help, health information, community kitchen, and more.
Mother to Mother builds communities of women to support each other. By tuning into our podcast, you have joined the Mother to Mother family today. Welcome, and enjoy the rest of this episode.
I feel that I'm only qualified to this not as a therapist, but as a person who's been through it. And again, speaking to people who have been on this journey for years, that may be something to consider, like maybe to wonder, just to be curious, could this be coming from a place of anxiety or something other in the brain? And now I'm a therapist, qualified or qualifying, practicing as part of my qualification, and starting to see other people with, lots of different mental health symptoms, issues, struggles, but anxiety suddenly became something that I was seeing almost like a mirror, and being able to face it and say, oh, okay, this is adding up more and more. So the beginning of the journey was accepting, that this may be a thing, reading this book called It's All in Your Head, understanding the brain, and then studying mental health in general and anxiety. So, for people listening, they may think this doesn't relate to me because physically I'm fine. For other people, anxiety can come up much more in a sort of ruminating way, so that the thoughts, physically you could feel completely fine and functioning, but mentally you're kind of worrying over the same things over and over again. And particularly when we're talking about postpartum, so for many women it can be, thoughts of their own safety or the safety of their baby, and worrying, checking, are they breathing all night 10 times, not sleeping, and even to the degree that you don't trust yourself. But again, it's all coming from this anxious place. And anxiety can be very physical, it can be very mental, it can be very much just thoughts based, it can be a mixture. So really to remember that it is a very much a mind-body connection, and to be aware of how it can manifest. So for some people it can be a bit of both, one or the other.
Can you tell us a little bit of what you see and the symptoms that some people may have? So
most commonly with anxiety clients, I'm not sure what else to call them, clients with anxiety, there is, more often than not, there's the kind of the thought component, so the ruminations, the specific worries about certain things. Sometimes it can manifest as OCD, so like obsessive compulsive behaviors, but also I'd say almost as commonly there's a physical element as well. So panic attacks are far more common than we realize, and for many people and my clients, that first panic attack is an enormous shock. It's very scary. You have no understanding of what's happening to you, and that's quite a common experience that we don't necessarily talk about. You don't, walk up to someone and say, I just had a panic attack, and how are you? But many people do at some point in life experience.
What are the symptoms of a panic attack? So they can be quite broad, but generally you will feel like your heart rates increase. You might feel quite jittery, maybe get a sweaty, cold. Breathing for many people can be a real struggle. They sort of tell you, I think, if you call 111, like to breathe into a paper bag to try and regulate your breathing. So you start to feel like you're not breathing properly, maybe choking, dizziness. It can really be very extensive, and they can last for quite a long time. Obviously not days, but you're talking 20 minutes, half an hour, and that can feel really long for someone who's having one. And if you recognize you're having one, are there ways to pull you out of it besides like going into a paper bag for breathing?
I think first of all, it's a long-term piece of work. So it's not like I'm having a panic attack, I'm going to fix it. There's definitely something in becoming more aware of that, becoming more aware of when they're starting, doing your own, either, your own self-awareness or going into therapy to deal with the underlying anxiety. Because a panic attack is unusual. It's unusual for it to just happen, right? It's not a spontaneous, rootless thing. There's going almost always going to be something that you're not processing, that you're not dealing with. And I'd say that's the case for any, episode of depression or anxiety. It's really our bodies saying, hey, you're not paying attention to something. And I've tried to tell you in subtle ways, now I'm going to kind of ramp up my requests here and say, could you deal with what's going on? And that may not be a trauma. It may not be anything dramatic. It may be that you're not sleeping enough, or you're stressed too much, your workload is too much. Whatever it is, your body is much, much wiser than your mind sometimes. And it goes, hey, you need to put a pause on this. Does that make sense?
100%.
It's like, hey, it's an alarm. Listen to me. It's getting more serious now.
So panic attacks that can happen in pregnancy, could someone put that down to maybe just being hormonal and there isn't a underlying issue?
Yeah.
Whereas, and also postpartum.
Yeah.
Whereas then having it maybe randomly, not postpartum, not pregnant, having a panic attack,
Yes.
then it could be something more underlying.
Yeah. I think, to backtrack, I think it can be random, but it can, I'm
Right.
saying it also can be, it's almost like do a little self-check-in. Is there something going on in my life that I'm not addressing or that isn't working for me? Am I not sleeping enough? So sometimes it can be a physical root, you're not eating the right things, you're not sleeping enough. And these are things that need to be fixed. We need to take care of ourselves in a holistic way. But yeah, in answer to your question, I think there is very much a hormonal component. For me, as I said, I'd never had anxiety before until pregnancy and postpartum. And interestingly, through my client work, working with women going through sort of perimenopause, menopausal women, not all of them, but many of them struggle with anxiety as they're going through that process. Suddenly, for the first time in their lives, they are experiencing anxiety. So there is almost definitely a hormonal component if that's happening. That we probably haven't researched enough and spread enough awareness about. So yes, I think pregnancy can trigger it. Standing alone, forget what's going on in your life. And I think postpartum can definitely trigger it.
So during these 4 years, you were studying you started your studying of becoming a therapist. And through that, you actually found some sort of awareness. Would you call that healing, or you just had the awareness now of what you were going through?
No, absolutely healing. It suddenly put all of the pieces together and it made sense in my mind. And I think one of the first steps to healing is understanding, is to have knowledge, and knowledge is power. To really know, okay, this is what happened to me, that's what was going on. And that helped me to get through the panic attacks, because anxiety can go on even when you have that awareness, even when you've done the therapy. It doesn't just disappear. But I could start telling myself a different narrative. So it went from you're dying, you're having a stroke, to, oh, it's that again. It's your old friend. It's anxiety. You're not going to die. You've had this 100 times before. If you haven't died the last 100 times, it's unlikely you're going to die this time. And my husband and I, we had this little kind of running joke. He'd come home and be like, so what did you die of today? And I'd tell him, like, I had a heart attack at 11 o'clock and a stroke at 12. And like, I'm not trying to make light of people who have these experiences.
This is how you dealt with it.
This is how we coped with it, and laughing at it and becoming able to change the script in my head was incredibly healing, and really pushed me forward to the point where I was pretty much out of anxiety and back to what I'd say was like my equilibrium, which was I dabbled in depression, but anxiety wasn't an issue for me. So we'd taken a 4-year break just to kind of, to put me back together in many, many different ways, and to put our marriage back together and to put our parenting back together, which I think is a very important part of our journey and what we needed to do, and you do what works for you individually. So in the middle of my training and in the very beginning of this journey of this kind of trauma, anxiety experience, that first year in therapy, my mum got diagnosed with breast cancer. It was a very awful experience to come to terms with, because it wasn't like she's got cancer and it's treatable. It's she's got cancer and it's not treatable, but we're going to be positive and say maybe she has 10 years. And so all of us had this like big 10 years in our head, and I was 26 at the time, and 10 years felt like a long time, right? So I can kind of put it on a back burner, but my mind and my body didn't. There was definitely an awareness all of that time that this was also happening, and trying to process the trauma and the anxiety and what was going on with my mum, and then my own health journey, which is why I think my experience extended for 4 years. I don't think that's kind of average for everyone. So for people not to panic if they have postpartum anxiety, it's going to last that long. For me, it was a continual.
Yeah, because there were things that were constantly.
Yeah. Okay, so my mum got diagnosed with breast cancer, and unfortunately her 10-year sort of hope was cut down into about 4.5 years. So it was quite a rapid deterioration in the last year, which was around the same time that I had healed from the anxiety and was starting to think about having another baby. But I was terrified, and my husband was terrified. What if it triggers another anxiety experience? What if it's worse? You hear of worst case scenarios of women with postpartum psychosis where they have to be hospitalized. And for me, I knew that was a possibility. I knew it was a risk, because the more you have it, the more likely that you'll have it again. So I actually, around April 2019, my mum took a turn for the worse. She was very, very ill, and there was a Tehillim organised in Edgware for her, and she didn't want to go to it. So we took a walk up to the horses in Edgware, which is like my happy, safe place. And when I say a walk, it was a very, very slow walk. She was very, very weak, but I thought, I'm going to talk this through with her. You know, normally I wouldn't sort of ask my mum, should I have another baby? And what do you think? But it felt like this is a conversation that maybe you can do. Yeah. But for me, it was, you know, in a sense, knowing that she wasn't going to be here for much longer. And I wanted her to be a part of that journey, even if it was just in concept, just in like, you know, the planning. So we talked it through, and she'd seen what the experiences had been like for me before. And I can't remember what we spoke about, but I do know that I came away feeling like I could do this. I felt hopeful. I felt like this is going to be okay. And this renewed sense of like, I really want to do this. I want my mum to meet another grandchild. So there was this real like drive to make that happen. And thank God she actually lived to meet 3 new grandchildren. So 3 of us had babies in the last sort of 8 weeks of her life. Which was, you know, it was both very, very sad, but very, very special as well, that we feel like those babies met her on some level. Wow. So I had baby number 4 in January 2020. That year probably makes everyone shudder.
Yeah, like COVID.
my stomach just flip-flops here in 2020. So the day that he was born, I remember going into the hospital and seeing those posters on the walls, like, if you have traveled to China, and listed another couple of countries, and then there were lists of instructions, and just looking at it and being like, it's fine, it's really far away, it's the far, far east, it's not coming here. So that was, you know, in the atmosphere, but I wasn't taking it very seriously, because I just wanted to give birth and get through that. But also the day that he was born, my mum had her kind of final terminal diagnosis. So I didn't know that at the time, but they came to visit me in the hospital, and I could hear them whispering to my husband in the corridor outside. And I knew something was wrong, you know, but so they were trying to
drawing the actual birth.
Yeah. So it was very much like birth, and it was the beginning of a new life and the ending of an old life at the same time.
Oh my goodness.
It was an incredibly difficult experience. Yeah. The duality of those things, you know, like life and death. And they're both such huge, the beginning of life and the end of life are such huge things.
Yeah, huge moments.
Huge moments. And they were both happening at the same time. And my parents were trying to kind of protect me, because they know I'm a little bit fragile is an understatement, a lot fragile after that. They were trying to protect me from that. And in a way, not knowing.
We all are.
Yeah.
It's very normal.
Not knowing was difficult as well. But, you know, I think I didn't want to know as well. I didn't want to know how quickly this was going to happen. So I'd say within a day, I knew that postpartum anxiety was back, very much more obviously than ever before. It was really, really raging. I think the more your body has experienced something, the quicker it goes back to it.
And how did that feel?
It felt terrifying. It was different to, I'd say the postpartum anxiety the last time was a little bit less intense in the sense that it was kind of drip fed the beginning.
So do you feel like it came back with a vengeance?
Completely. It was just like this monster just filled up the room, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Again, I still didn't 100%, because each experience with anxiety, even for an individual, can be different. But I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't eat, and I couldn't relax, and I was constantly like this, hands shaking, body shaking, very, very cold. I remember being like freezing cold. I'm not a cold person by nature, so I didn't come in with a coat today. And I just felt like I was falling apart inside. I looked great. That was the irony. I looked great. My house looked great. One of the ways I coped with that anxiety, even from the beginning when I should have been in bed, was being up and dressed and out and hoovering and cleaning. I had so much excess energy, which is really what anxiety is. If you think about it in the survival sense, it's our bodies going run away or fight. And so you have all of this charge and nothing and nowhere to go with it. You know, you're meant to be at home.
Is that the difference between postpartum depression, postnatal depression, and anxiety? Postnatal depression can literally cause somebody to be bedridden and in a dark hole. Yes. Whereas anxiety gives you that, you don't know what to do with yourself 100%. And you're on the go.
Yeah. And you can have both, by the way.
Oh, really?
At points I'd get so drained and debilitated from the anxiety, I'd feel depressed and I'd cry. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And vice versa. So yes, but anxiety primarily is much more kind of energy based. So you're really feeling like this excessive and to a point of discomfort. It's not like, oh, I can, do lots of things. It's not a happy excess of energy. It's a very difficult one. It's too much energy with nowhere to put it. And so you can't sleep, you can't eat, you just walk around the house in circles, or you hoover, or you find things to do. And by nature, I'm a very calm person, and I don't care if my house isn't hoovered. And I get up every morning with postpartum anxiety and like blitz the house. It looked great, not gonna lie. And I looked great because I got up every day and I had to look good. I think it's also a control thing. It's like I feel so chaotic inside, at least I'm gonna look good on the outside. And I'd get comments like, and with both number 4 and 5, I'd lost weight because of the anxiety. You look amazing, you've lost so much weight. And the irony was that I wasn't doing well at all. And in fact, the more weight I lose, probably the worse I'm doing inside. And I don't want to worry. People who know me, if I go on a diet and lose weight, don't panic. But generally, I like my food. If I've gone off my food, there's something wrong, right? So that was number 4. Now, again, I have the postpartum things with the environmental situation of COVID is like rapidly encroaching on Europe. But if you remember that experience when we're like the news every day, we're like, oh my gosh, this thing is coming. It's coming. We can't stop it. What does it mean?
What's going to be with Pesach?
Right.
It was just
what's going to be. Who's going to live? Who's
Yes.
going to die? How are we going to cope with our kids at home? I can't, even talking about it now, I don't know how you feel, but I feel a little bit of my stomach going like, oh my goodness, why are we thinking about this?
I remember we couldn't even walk like 100 meters from our house.
Yeah.
And that was like very claustrophobic.
It was awful.
Feeling.
And we had all the kids home, and we couldn't explain it to the kids, and we didn't know when they were going back to school, and we had maybe semi-elderly parents or loved ones. It was a horrible time for everyone. So that was coming. I was dealing with that, and with my mum getting more and more ill. So this was really the end for her. And the anxiety was just unmanageable. It was really, truly looking back, I don't know how I survived it, honestly. It was just pure grit and determination.
And at this point, did you go to seek professional help,
Yes.
get medication?
Yeah.
Because you are a therapist yourself.
Yes. So now I was a therapist, and I could no longer
No excuses.
gaslight myself and pretend. So
Yeah.
I did go to a doctor, and they prescribed me an SSRI called sertraline, which is quite common. And I was terrified. Like medication, it's got such a stigma to it. Not just necessarily what people will think, but will it make me worse? Will I be on it forever? Will I get addicted? There's so many questions around medication. Obviously, I'm not allowed to prescribe or to suggest as a therapist, but what I would say is don't write it off just from things you've heard through the grapevine.
Any kind of help that somebody offers you, don't just write off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I did take it, and I felt awful. I felt like a zombie. I felt worse, and I was like, I'd rather suffer with what I know than this kind of foreign experience. I didn't know at the time what it was like to go on medication. I hadn't yet started seeing clients privately, so I had just finished my qualification when I had him. So I went off it, and I struggled through, and
Is that normal that it takes time to kick in?
Yeah, we'll talk about that with number 5.
Oh.
Yeah.
So at the time you didn't realise this is the kicking
I didn't
in
realize.
stage.
Well, I knew you could have side effects, but I didn't
Right.
realize those passed. I thought like, no way, if I'm going to feel like this, I'd rather feel what I felt yesterday than what I feel today.
So how long did you take the medication
Just
for?
the once.
You took one?
No.
Really brave, just once.
And it kicked in so fast.
Yeah, I'm like a highly sensitive soul, so I take paracetamol. I'm like, something's off balance, like I'm very, very sensitive. So I'm a therapist, but often sensitive people, spiritually, emotionally, are also physically quite sensitive. So I'm hyper aware of like everything. Also, anxiety makes you do that too. I went back to a therapist who I had stopped seeing because I didn't need to, and I was like, I'm back. I really need to see you. I postpartum, my mum's dying, and COVID's coming. Can you help me? I need to talk to someone. And it was
she probably just
comfortable.
took this big breath. Okay.
You again.
No, postpartum.
Oh.
Mum's dying.
Well, no, she'd also just helped me
And
through an
COVID.
enormous 4 years. She probably thought, oh my gosh, not her. It's the tornado. So I went back to her. But honestly, truly, I think, and this is generally something I've been thinking about for what is different with postpartum anxiety, depression, OCD, whatever, well, let's call it perinatal mental health to everything else, is that all of the things we suggest as professional, mental health professionals to self-help, things like exercise and eating and sleeping and meditating and self-care, realistically, for most people are not happening postpartum, right? You have a newborn. If you're breastfeeding, you don't sleep at all. If you're bottle feeding, you maybe sleep some of the day, but your husband has to work, so you can't just not do the night at all. You're certainly not thinking about exercise, right? You're barely able to grab a sandwich, let alone make yourself a healthy meal. So all of the things that one should be doing to help themselves go out of the window. And actually you don't really have the capacity as much as you could maybe with some other struggles in life to do all of those things, especially if you have no support. So yes, I did go back to therapy, but honestly, I feel like in that period, for me, in that period of my life, and I'm a very big therapy advocate. I'm a therapist. I love a bit of therapy myself. I've done a lot of therapy myself, but actually that's not necessarily so much what I needed to get out of that. What I need for me in postpartum is to not be alone more than anything. Support, to not be by myself, to not be alone with myself. And as I said before, naturally, I actually quite like being alone. I quite like my own space, my own company. Not necessarily, but people annoy me, and I, and I need my space.
I understand that.
Okay, we should be friends. But postpartum, I'm like, anyone and everyone, please just stay with me. Let me hug you. Like I've become this, like, I think it's now called a Labrador, like the kind of person that just attaches to people very quickly. I switched from being like, could you please go away, to please don't ever leave me. But it took me till baby number 5 to figure that out. So really fast forwarding. Baby number 4, the experience of very bad postpartum anxiety, to the point where I was walking around Edgware 4 times a day just to deal with the anxiety, taking him on walks. Also, he didn't sleep, so it was kind of a bit of both. But to deal with all of that energy, and often when the kind of energy rush crashed, so around midday, I'd then start to feel the depression kick in. So it's really your body's kind of running all of this energy, and then burns out. And then there's a bit of space for the feeling, and I would just walk around Edgware crying. Don't know if any of you out there saw me.
It's just
I couldn't hold it in. I couldn't hold it in. I would be in the most public of places, and I couldn't stop the tears because it was such a painful experience. Also losing my mum at the same time, also knowing that COVID was coming. But actually what switched for me was when he was 8 weeks old, lockdown happened, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. And suddenly I felt like I wasn't missing out anymore. And I know that sounds awful for the rest of you who got locked in your homes because of my needs. No, I didn't cause the pandemic, but it really...
You didn't eat the bat.
No, and I didn't dub and Hashem should send a plague so that everyone had to have a rubbish time at home like me. And suddenly I wasn't missing out on anything. But it was very much a moment of relief for me, like, oh, my husband's home. I'm not alone. Even in such an awful experience, right? Like the whole world is suffering, but at least my husband's home. For me, I think I'm trying to highlight how bad the anxiety was and how awful I felt being alone, to the degree that I embraced lockdown. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which is my worst nightmare as a person generally. Though, the thought of having my kids home 24/7 is like an awful, awful thought. And even having my husband around 24/7 isn't exactly the most exciting thing all the time. I'm very much a space needer, but this was the beginning of healing for me. And then when my baby was 11 weeks old, was Pesach time, and my mum took a kind of final turn for the worse. And it was Motzei first days, and my dad called pretty much to say, this is really the end, and we've decided. My mum wanted to die at home, because at that point, if you went into a hospital, you didn't come out, the family couldn't be with you. And she had this amazing nurse from the community who moved into my parents' house to be with her at the end, an NHS nurse, but happens to be, from...
That's incredible.
Incredible chesed. And so she said, just come and see her. My mum had been nervous. She didn't want us in the house because of my dad. She didn't want him getting COVID. This was still at that point where we had no idea what it was and who it would affect and how it would affect them. But she said, you've got to come. This is the end. And so we went in, we put on the PPE. I can't wear masks. They still kind of traumatized me because we spent those 3 days in these masks, and I'd so much associate that with the end of my mum's life. And that was the most horrific experience of my life so far. It was incredibly, indescribably painful and difficult, and no one should have to go through that at a young age. On the one hand, but on the other hand, something inside me also healed, in the sense that I was again in that place of home. I was with family. I was with, my siblings. We all spent 2 or 3 days together, as much of the day as we could, around my mum's bed. And although, the grief really took off, and that's a whole separate story and a separate journey in terms of, healing, the postpartum part of me started to heal because I wasn't alone and I was with family and I felt safe. And so that was really an aha moment for me. Like, what is the remedy to this for me at least, is to not be alone, is to be in a safe space, is to be with people that I feel connected to and safe with, who don't need to run off to work or who don't need to run off. Do you know what I mean? It's this very unrealistic, unfortunately, experience. But because it was COVID and because my mum was dying, everyone was just together and with nowhere to go, and time stood still. And so then that postpartum experience really shifted more into grief, and what that did for me was allow expression of all the things I had been holding in the postpartum experience, as well as the grief. Suddenly I was allowed to cry, and I was allowed to be angry, and I was allowed to not cope, and I was allowed to do all the things that the world accepts. Your mum's just died, sure, go ahead, cry, scream, shout.
Let it all out.
Let it all out. Go to therapy. We'll help. We're here. We understand. And that gave me permission to do what the postpartum me needed permission to do, but wouldn't, because who gives you permission to kick and scream and cry when you're just postpartum and it's a simcha? So again, that was really a difficult but also healing experience, to go into the depths of that pain and to really reach into like the very bottom of your soul. Really, grief is. It's a very healing experience. It's a very difficult experience, and you have to go through it. You have to go through it to come out of it. But in going through it, it allows so much healing of things that you would never have had to address otherwise. And
so actually, one of the most difficult experience of your life to date was the most healing time.
Yes. Yeah. And this isn't me saying I'd wish it on anyone or
no,
ever want to go
not.
through it again. I'd never wish
but
that
for
to have
you
happened.
Personally.
For me personally. And I think that's the case with any pain. With any pain that we go through, to a degree, there is a growth in it. There is a healing. But it takes time, and you can't do it alone. And that's what I've learned. You're not meant to do things alone. I think as human beings, we were designed to what we call in the therapy world co-regulate. So with our kids, when they're scared or they're sad, our job as the big parent is to go, you're okay, you're safe, don't worry. It's okay to hold them physically. And that need doesn't disappear just because we become big adults. We constantly need someone to help us regulate, to co-regulate with one another, which is what therapy does. We speak, but we also we regulate just through our nervous systems, just through our energies. And so understanding that part of the human healing need is to be with someone, or to speak with someone, or to hear a podcast from someone who gets it, who can support you in that regard. And that is incredibly important. Isolating in any situation in life, loneliness is the biggest killer. So as much as depression, anxiety make you think I've got to hide, I've got to stay in bed, or I've got to pretend to be okay, that is the worst advice that our brains give us. Really, we need to connect, we need to reach out, we need to share. So that is what I would say I've learned the most from my experience. So thinking about baby number 5, and obviously I've had a couple of very difficult postpartum experiences, and a part of me is terrified to try again. Terrified is an understatement. I, in a sense, don't have to do this, right? I can choose not to. Why would I? So, a couple of things, but one of the biggest, sort of the most powerful moments for me in choosing whether to go forward to have another baby or not was when I was at my mum's funeral. So it was very private. It was the first kind of week or two of lockdown. It was just the family there, which was really in some ways a very beautiful experience. It was very intimate. I was watching my brothers, it's a mitzvah for the family to physically bury, especially a parent, but to bury the mace. So I was watching them fill in the grave, and I have 3 brothers, and they were, kind of doing it together. And I just thought, this is it. Like, this is really all that matters. Obviously, if you're religious, you have the belief that there is the next world and your good deeds, and that is one thing. But physically, all we leave behind are our children. That's it. There is nothing else. And that moment of just watching, my 3 brothers doing this for my mum, and thinking about the sacrifices she made to have us. She actually lost 2 babies as well. She lost 2 babies, both of them were about 2 weeks old. So tremendous sacrifice and tremendous courage to try again.
She sounds like the most incredible lady.
Very courageous.
Yeah. And you sound like you were really close with her.
Yeah. It's, mum, daughters, we're best friends and worst enemies at the same time. That's a very classic mum and daughter thing, for all of you out there listening.
My mum's probably laughing at this.
My sister and I joked, well, my sister made the joke after she died a couple of months in. We talked a lot, and we're like, and she said, like, what I would give to have another fight with mum. Like, that's when it's real love. When you're fighting and you hate the person, then you love them, and that's love. So anyway, watching us as kids say goodbye goodbye to her, it made me realize that this blip of time that is postpartum is just that. In the scheme of a whole life and a whole future generations of humans, it is very, very short-lived. It feels very difficult, and when you're in it, every day feels like a year, but it is a blip of time. And so that really pushed me forward with my want to have another one, but I was going to do it differently this time. This time I was going to have a plan, and I was going to assume that this was going to happen.
Therapist hat
fully on. I was going to do the meditating, and I was going to do the deep breathing, and I was going to do the self-talk and
medication
and reach out to every organization known to mankind, and anyone who would listen, I would tell them. And I did. And she was born this past August. And very quickly I recognized again, I think you become quite familiar. And even then I was like, well, maybe this time it's just the baby blues. Maybe I'm normal. Maybe I'll just be like every other woman and not have it full blown. But unfortunately, it did develop not as quickly as baby number 4, I think, because environmentally there wasn't anything, thank God, going on. There was no pandemic. No one was dying. So that wasn't, exaggerating what I was already feeling. But I did notice it was coming back. So I remembered my promise to myself. Even though a part of me was like, I don't want to reach out. I don't want anyone to know. I don't want to go through medication. I'm just going to pretend. Eventually it got to a point where I had to make good on the promise that I'd made myself. And what helped was that I had a few friends by that point who knew what I was going to be like. And they checked in, and they were like very, very, very mindful of what could be happening. And I think that's also incredibly important. If you're someone who now knows that this is potential, and who now knows that you may not have the capacity yourself to recognize it or do anything about it, have someone else know.
At what stage did you decide to share this with your friends?
After baby number 4, I was sharing with anyone and everyone who cared to listen, and got a lot of stories back. Women talking about things like not eating for the first year, or not feeling like they could go out the house safely for the first year, and these just being normal behaviors. It's quite eye-opening when you start sharing what you get back and realizing, wow, this is a lot more common. And also I think the statistics are something like 20% of women will have postpartum anxiety, depression, or both. And so if you think about it in our community, if you're having multiple children, you increase the chances of having that experience at least once postpartum.
So how did your husband react to the last 2 postpartums? How was he with it all?
So I think for my husband, I guess similarly to myself, there was an element of, I don't know if it's denial or just a wish that it wasn't back again. So baby number 4, obviously we've spoken about how hectic my life was at the time with COVID and my mum very ill. And so it was very hard as well to pinpoint for people outside, to pinpoint what exactly was going on for me. I think even for my husband, it was a bit of a struggle, and perhaps even for myself. But baby number 4, I was very quickly hit with postpartum anxiety. I would say pretty much by sort of night 3, it had come on full force. And my husband didn't know it, because this was quite a new experience. I'd had a lot of postpartum depression before, but never anxiety. So for both of us, it was kind of a new experience. And even having had experiences before, I don't know if he fully understood what this new thing was, what anxiety meant, because I looked so functional. I was up and about and cleaning the house and dressed. It's very easy to disguise it. And so, to be honest, there were difficulties in conveying to anyone, including him, how much I was struggling. But it was something we talked about a lot between baby number 4 and number 5. In hindsight, he could see, and I could put words to it, whereas in the thick of it, I couldn't. So we both really prepared and planned for postpartum number 5. And he was so much on board. I mean, I'd said to him, when I have this baby, I'm going to need you to take off a month from work. And that's kind of unheard of, although some people now get like 6 months paternity leave, which is great. Unfortunately, not him. And it was almost like a contract. We agreed this is what was going to happen. And he really understood. Because I remember one of my most difficult memories of postpartum number 4 was, I think I must have been about 10 days postpartum, and he had to go back to work. It was the end of his leave. And I felt so ill physically and so weak and so scared to be alone. I just didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to be alone with the feelings, with the thoughts, with the fear. And this fear is so real, even though there is no fear, there's nothing really, there's no threat, but you feel so scared. And when a person is scared, they don't want to be alone. And obviously he had to go back to work, and I felt abandoned. again, you know, logically, I know that's not what he was doing. He had to go back to work, but I felt abandoned and let down and so alone. So we both agreed that he was going to, you know, regardless of the finances, he was going to take that time off. And he was just so much more aware. You know, he was so much better at checking in and really understanding how much I needed him. So, you know, whereas previously he might have been like, you know, I want to get back to Shacharis now, or I want to get back to whatever it is in the evenings, he knew that he had to kind of let go of that. Even if it was 6 months or 9 months or a year, it would come back. And I'm not saying it was easy for him. It was very, very difficult, I think, for men, you know, to give up on that routine or to give up on shul is not easy. But he just understood so much more this time that I just needed his presence, even if he wasn't doing anything particularly constructive or he was, you know, managing the other kids. I just needed him around. So he's really, really, really developed. And I think, you know, I don't give him enough credit perhaps for how much of a struggle it was for him, but we spoke about it a lot this time around, very, very openly. And it's really painful to watch your wife like that. And I think it's quite scary, you know, wondering, is she ever going to come back? And I'm imagining that there are a number of men out there who are going through this, you know, watching their wife change almost overnight, and the life they knew change, and fearing that it may never come back again. So just to give hope to all the men listening out there, that with your support and with the right help, she will recover and she will get back to herself. Just regarding medication, I think for me, that experience that I had with postpartum number 4, where I was given the medication, I took it for a day and then was so scared by the reaction I had to it that I stopped. What I wish I would have known then is that, yes, you could get side effects, and some of them are quite difficult. For me, they lasted for about a month to 6 weeks. Within that time, they gradually got better. But I needed support getting through that. And I had found, through being so open about my journey, a few friends who had been on medication before, who really almost like coached me and held my hand through that first month. But once that period of kind of weaning on was over, I really felt so much better and back to myself. But all along, I had intended, with the doctor that prescribed the medication to me, I'd intended to give it 6 months to a year and no longer, because really this is a very specific postpartum, you know, mental health issue. It's not a chronic, clinical, ongoing issue. It's very specific to the amount of time that your postpartum period is. And so that's really generally the only time that you need it for. So at 6 months postpartum, I really felt like I'm ready to start weaning off. I did that with the doctor. Again, there were side effects. The withdrawal was quite difficult for a couple of weeks, but I really held on to the knowledge that it had taken my body time to adjust onto it, and then it had been good. And so it would take my body time to adjust back off of it, and then things would be good as well. And so I'm quite fresh off that experience. And just for anyone out there who is, you know, who's nervous, who's been suggested any SSRI or other antidepressant medication, nervous about, you know, dependency, addiction, there's lots of misinformation out there. Talk to your doctor, because it's not the case most of the time. And this is a very short-lived course of treatment. I think that's the way I looked at it. So that's something that I wish I had known back in my previous postpartum experiences.
So now, baby number 5, did you actually take the medication again? And did you last more than 1 day?
Right. So it was still a big challenge for me. I was still very scared. But again, I had made this promise to myself, and I had contacted a couple of people who somehow I'd found out they had you know, medication for similar or other experiences. A couple of friends' husbands needed it for other, you know, depressive or anxious episodes. And I had started to piece together that for some people, you can have really strong side effects that feel worse for the beginning. That first month, I kept hearing the first month is difficult, the first month is hell, the first month is really a struggle. And so I told myself, okay, this is normal. It's scary what I'm feeling, but it's a part of this process, and just to sit with it. And that was when the support was even more important for me. So if anyone out there needs to be medicated and has side effects, again, just increasing that need to ask for help. So for me, it was having more contact with mother to mother, more meals, more help from my postpartum doula, whatever it was to get through that adjustment period. But once that passed, so about 4 to 6 weeks on the medication, I felt like I woke up and the world was like colorful again. I remember like looking up in the sky and there were these birds flying. I'm not really such an artsy person, and usually I'm too busy in my head to think about it, but I was like, wow, the world is beautiful and the sun is so bright and the world's so full of color. And I realized like, wow, this is the difference this medication has made for me.
And also you're not on the medication forever.
Not forever. I've
well.
actually come off it. So I'm now 7 months postpartum. I've been off it for a couple of weeks. There was a bit of a withdrawal. That can also happen. Again, speak to people. Don't do it alone. Reach out to, doctors, friends, whatever it is, people who've been through this to hold your hand, because it's difficult, but it's better. For me, it was better than what would have been with my others, which was hell for 6 months, and then 6 months of slightly less, and then 6 months of putting myself back together from the first year. Whereas now I'm 7 months on. Life's not perfect. Life is life. It's real, but I feel so much more myself, so much more positive. And having an experience where medication switched my brain for a bit, it's also helped me to realize how much of life is how we perceive things through our own thoughts, the narrative we tell ourselves, the stories that we make in our own heads that we don't have control over. It's helping me to realize that now, because I've had a little break from my own mind and having this really kind of peaceful experience that for me the medication was. Obviously I can't speak for everyone, so I would have told myself, my younger self, take the medication. You'll come off it again and you'll go back on it if and when you need. It's not such a big deal, and you can find people out there that can support you through that part of this journey as well.
Wow.
So my first step on my to-do list was to contact Mother to Mother, because actually I had been in contact with them for baby number 4. They'd offered me everything they had and I wasn't ready to accept it.
And they were also in their baby steps.
They were in their baby steps,
stage,
but there was
very new.
A lot that they could have done that I didn't want to take. I didn't feel like I wanted to, especially being in the community where you see them in shul and you see them in Hadar and you see them. I felt a bit self-conscious about it all.
It's we spoke about this maybe on another podcast, like being able to accept
that you need
the help.
Yeah,
accept that you need the help for sure. It's like, and if you're not able to do it yet, then they can offer all the help that's out there, but if you're not ready to take it, then
nothing helps.
You have to want to help yourself first.
That's so true.
For sure. So I reached out. It was the middle of the summer holidays. They were all working from their cars with their kids, going on outings type of thing. They were amazing. It happens to be I had a bit more of an interaction with Mother to Mother in between baby 4 and 5, because I had heard more about them. They did a fundraising dinner. I started to realize what they did, and they offer really more than anything kind of practical support. So I contacted the volunteer and she sent me this long list of things they could help, practical things that they could help with, including cleaning help and nannies and meals and lunches and doctor's appointments. She kind of slipped that in at the end very subtly, in just the way I needed. Can I make you a doctor's appointment? And I didn't want to say yes, but also I didn't want to make my own doctor's appointment. And having someone else say, can I make it for you, was just enough for me to go, yes, please. And actually, I really need this. And so they made me one. I cancelled it because I'd had a few good days and I was like, oh, no, it's gone. I'm fine. I was so not ready to accept that this was happening again. I was, how old am I? 33 years old, a therapist, been working, had all these experiences before, and I still did not want to come to terms with it, that it was really happening, that it wasn't going to pass. Because for some women, it does shift. 10 days, first month, it does tend to go. When you're definitely in postpartum depression or anxiety, it tends to peak around 6 to 8 weeks. It gets worse and you can't deny it anymore. So I cancelled that first appointment, had a couple of good days, and then it came back with a vengeance. And I was like, you're not, I just sat myself down. You're not doing this again. You're not doing the playing around and dodging, out of this and saying it will get better and I can just hold on another day and then maybe the next day it'll be better. You are going to get yourself the help you promised yourself. You promised yourself that you were going to do this. Now is the time.
Did your husband encourage you as well?
Everyone. All of my friends, everyone I told, anyone and everyone who cared to listen, I told them, and I was like, drag me to therapy, drag me to the doctor, whatever it is, make me ask for help in every what way, because I may not have the capacity to do it myself. And really, you don't necessarily at that period of your life. You're just so on the floor with exhaustion. Your body's, just not your own anymore. And it's very, very difficult to advocate for yourself in those early postpartum weeks. So important to have someone.
So you spoke to a volunteer and they offered everything.
They offered everything. So from the beginning, the experience I felt with Mother to Mother was like I was doing them a chesed by taking their chesed. Genuinely, I felt like they were happy that I had reached out, and they were happy to give whatever it was that I needed. And I've been thinking about it a little bit. We have this concept that we grew up with, like, the world is built on chesed, that is very much like a Jewish concept. And so we translate that as giving, as making organizations and tzedakahs and giving. But what about if we look at the like flip side of that? Chesed can only happen if there's a conduit, if there's something to receive it. And so perhaps some of our task as human beings is also to learn to receive, particularly as women, because we give and give and give and give. That maybe that is the other side to the concept of chesed and of how core it is to mankind, is actually we have to learn to receive. And it took me all of this time to learn to receive. And mother to mother are there to give. That is what they want to do. That's why they were set up. They are excited to give. They're happy to give. They do not make you feel in any which way that you're a nebuch, that you're taking advantage, that you are incapable. It's more like, you've just gone through something really difficult. We get that. And we want to make this easier for you, because why not? You're going through one of the hardest things that we sort of look at as all rainbows and butterflies and kind of balloon Instagram pictures. And actually, it's not an easy experience. For many, many women, it's one of the hardest, most life-changing, and for a first baby, I'd say life-shattering events of your life, right? And mother to mother get that, and they get that in such a kind and such a sensitive way that you feel like, oh, they're here because it's normal that I feel like this. They've set up an organization because it's needed. That means I'm not the only person who's experiencing this, right? Because why would they have a whole organization if it was just me?
That's so true.
Yeah.
So my whole experience with mother to mother was, we value this journey. We value what you're doing. We value motherhood, because really a happy mum is vital to our kids' physical and mental health. We talk about like the mental health crisis. Maybe we're not looking enough at the roots, which is us. As Jewish women, we are so much focused on giving and others, and not me, and I'm okay and I don't need. That's a problem, right? There's a problem with the root of the trees, and that needs to be addressed. And so mother to mother get that. That is the whole purpose. And for me, I didn't have a mother at that point. Obviously baby number 4, I didn't either, but I could talk to her. I still had that element of like emotional support. Even in her, weakest moments, I could call her up and cry, and she would still be there. She was still my mum. But I didn't have that with baby number 5. And so for me, even more so, and that can be in so many ways applicable for women who may have living mothers, but their mothers can't help them for practical reasons, or aren't that type, or aren't in the same country, whatever it is. This is very, very basic. Mothering a mother is such a basic part of a healthy human structure. And I have a friend who is actually Cypriot. She's originally from Cyprus, and she says in Cyprus it's just a given. The women of the family rally around the new mum. She barely sees the new baby, maybe to feed, and the auntie and the grandma and the sister and whoever, they all take care of mum and baby. It's not a question. So this friend who's not from our community, so does things a little bit differently. She's got this background as a Cypriot, Cyprus, for those of us who aren't aware of what Cypriot means. She also has postpartum struggles, and I went to visit her, and there was this lady in her house just doing everything you could think of, holding the baby, folding the laundry, cooking, cleaning. And I said to her, who is this person? Like, who is? And she doesn't have a mum. Who is this? And she said, I can't remember her name. She's a postpartum doula. And I'd never, ever heard of the concept. In our community, doulas are like a big thing, right? It's very understandable, totally accepted. Of course you're taking a doula, but a postpartum doula is unheard of. It's still relatively new in this country in general, but in our Hilla, forget it. What even is that? So a postpartum doula is a doula for postpartum, somebody who supports you physically and mentally and emotionally, and is, essentially a paid version of what should really have been. And in the Far East is a given, and in Middle East and Cyprus and India, they all rally together. So in the West, where we're very fiercely independent and don't have that, this is a kind of paid version. So mother to mother were incredibly supportive with everything that they could offer, and then went above and beyond. And one day my FLO, which stands for Family Liaison Officer, it's really just a gorgeous volunteer who you would have seen around in the shops and at Shaw and never really spoken to. They come once a week with this amazing lunch, which is such a treat, by the way. For many women, I think, they say that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. I think it applies just as much, if not more, to women. Bring me a nice lunch, especially after birth.
As well as supper every single night.
So nurturing.
And Shabbos food.
Exactly. And food is so nurturing. It's such a common love language. And so to feel cared for. So she was coming week after week, and seeing this postpartum doula who I had got a friend to link me up with and had found people to sponsor, because financially, again, I think it's important to own this, because there are many people listening who can't pay for that kind of help. I had to ask for sponsors. I had to ask people, and anyone who offered me a baby gift, I said, I don't need anything. It's baby number 5. please would you sponsor an hour? And I just gathered as much help as I could. My husband's bosses, I'm not going to name them, they are Sadiqim, they sponsored a huge amount of help with her. So my FLO was coming and seeing this postpartum doula whose name is Stacey, and I kind of called her my fairy godmother. She'd like pull up in her purple car and I could breathe again, like somebody's here to take care of me and baby when I need.
And there was glitter just everywhere.
Literally, like fairy tale in real life.
It's like when you hear that, I'm here, and you're like,
yeah, exactly. It's like when the husband comes in from work. You're like, oh, here's the kid, take your child. And they came and saw this, and she's just said to me, you know what, this is amazing. I can see how much it's helping you. I'm going to go back to Mother, tell them about this and see if we can continue offering or help you to continue the support. And they did. And then they said, if you need more afterwards, come back and we'll, and it wasn't even come back and ask. It was almost like, we'll check in with you and we'll offer it. So you never have to ask. And I think that's something that it was almost like I was doing them a favor by saying yes. And I think they really taught me, along with myself and my friends and this whole journey, that the most important part of healing from postpartum, whatever it is that you're going through, is putting yourself first, is making that promise to yourself to take care of yourself before anyone else. You know, that classic story of the mum who has one egg and shuts herself in a room and eats it that we all heard in school in STEM, or have they upgraded the story? Okay, you're both looking at me blankly.
Yeah.
This must have been like the 2000s version of the From Tales. It meant nothing to me. Like, okay, I have an egg and I eat it first. I understand it now. Your kids, and watching my older kids now, watching me struggling so much with this postpartum, not falling to pieces, but I remember sitting in front of the air conditioning unit because it was one of those awful summer days and we have one of the plug-in units, just crying my eyes out, and my 13-year-old watching me, and I could see in her face, like, what's happening? What's going on with Mummy? And yes, she was old enough to explain it to, but also she wasn't old enough to feel secure and feel safe with her mummy falling apart. Now it's okay, I've got 4 girls. I want them to know that this is normal. I want them to know it happens, but I also want them to know it's not normal to suffer alone. It's not normal to isolate yourself. It's not normal to struggle and not ask for help and not receive help. I wanted to model to them, this is what I want you to do. I want you, please God, to call me up and say, Mum, I'm not coping and I need help. And that to be totally normal and okay and understandable, because you've gone through an enormous physical change, mental change, emotional change, and life change. I think in every birth, there's a loss, there's a grief, right? With the first baby, you're grieving the loss of what was your life that you knew. Everything changes, but with each baby, that loss happens again. You're grieving the loss of the family of 3 or a 4 or a 5, and the structure that you had and the routine that you knew, and everything was in place, and suddenly it's chaos. And for some of us, we can't cope with chaos, right? Chaos totally throws us. It's so overwhelming. And so I want it to be accepted that this is as difficult as other life experiences. Now, again, I'm not equating it to losing my mum, but I would say for me personally, I can really soldier through most things. I can, I had a miscarriage between baby 4 and 5. I got back from the hospital. I picked up my kid. I carried on as normal. I was hurting inside. I was struggling inside, but it doesn't floor me. Postpartum, I am on the floor in every way, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I would say almost broken, and I need to reach out to others and then accept the help. I need to allow others to pick me up.
So did your oldest, she basically watched 2 different experiences between your 4th and your 5th.
Yes.
And I mean, she must have seen this huge difference between number 4 and number 5, which is amazing that you were able to show her. Like,
I'm sure she couldn't put words to it.
Yeah.
Because she was 9 with the first one, but she saw Mother to Mother coming in, and they'd come home and see the brown paper bag in the recycling pile, which meant Mummy had eaten. And did you save me any? And I'd say no, actually. I didn't.
This is not for you.
Because it's for me. And that's
exactly.
Another thing, learning that I am a whole person separate to my kids and to my husband and to my career, and that I deserve not to save them a bit of my lunch. Or for example, I've started going to a share that you can take babies to, but my baby has got to the point where she's like grabbing all the food and smacking my face, and I just couldn't focus. And so I've taken her to the childminder earlier, which I would never have done before. I'd never have gone to the share before because I'd be too miserable or too anxious, but I would never have taken, because I would never have left her and not taken her with, because I would have felt guilty, but she should be with me. And actually this journey postpartum for me has been about me, and not in a kind of selfish narcissistic way, like it's all about me, but it is all about me, because then it's going to mean that everybody else around me is better off.
I think it's amazing that Mother to Mother just help always remind us mums that point that you were saying, that, you know, put yourself first, remember yourself. Even the fact that they drop off lunch, you know, every Monday, and it's like, remember yourself.
For sure.
And then you continue that throughout the week. So
it's bringing back memories for when I gave birth in COVID and I got this brown paper bag, or however they packaged it, always differently. It was always a different lunch.
Yes.
And at that time when they weren't doing, now they give suppers, and you probably receive suppers in August every single night, and they have a whole kitchen.
Yeah.
And they give suppers every night, the most delicious. I see on the statuses. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's worth it to have a baby. This food looks amazing. And people tell me that the food is amazing. They have a really good chef. And every night there's supper and Shabbos food for a few weeks. And for however long the person needs it.
If needed.
If needed, they can continue.
Yeah.
And I remember just taking that lunch. It was COVID. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom flat. Taking that lunch into my bedroom. Everyone else was in the dining room, and everyone else. And just sitting there, and it felt like the biggest hug.
Yeah.
It really is like that.
100%.
And besides the FLO support, that's just one part of the package of services that Mother to Mother offers. I mean, besides all the food and everything that they give, the baby care advice, the household help, referrals to other services, and when your baby's ready to start leaving the house, there are so many options, like mother and baby swim sessions, which are incredible for bonding. The mum's cafe to catch up with friends, baby weighing services, music time, parents and education events. There's just so much.
So I kind of equated the food deliveries with my journey. So the first food package that I got, I couldn't eat. I was so anxious from the postpartum anxiety, but also from the medication, which can make you feel a lot worse for the first month or so, especially in terms of anxiety, feeling nauseous, not wanting to eat. Couldn't eat. I maybe had a bite. And as time went along and I was healing, and the medication and the therapy and the I don't even like to call it self-care. I'd like to say like self-responsibility kicked in, because realistically, no one's going for manicures or bubble baths postpartum, but I was taking responsibility for my journey, for my recovery. As that got better, I could enjoy the lunches more. And so this like cycle, because they kept me on for quite a long time, I think because they just knew I needed extra TLC. You know, they knew that I needed that hug more often than maybe some other women might.
It's incredible. They're so in tune.
So intuitive. And if they don't get it, you tell them, and they run around the world to make it happen for you.
They literally do that.
Yeah, literally.
I know the volunteers, and they are just the most selfless, most incredible human beings.
Yeah. But again, I think it's going back to what you said, that we have to be ready to accept the help.
Yes.
So that is the key, the key point. And I think that is something that I really want to share.
So talking to that listener who
talking to you right now, you feel that hopelessness, that despair, like it will never get better. First of all, there is hope. You will feel better again. You will get back to yourself. You will recover from this. But also to know that one of the key steps on that journey is to just open yourself up to that chesed, to that giving that exists out there, and to the people in your life and strangers in the community that really get it, that really want to support you because they understand what you're going through and what will help you to recover. So really to put that out there, it took me the best part of 13 years and 5 babies to understand
and
it.
being a therapist.
And having had all this life experience, it took me so long, so I get how hard it is. But if I can kind of encourage one person out there to say, okay, it's really difficult for me to ask for help, but I'm going to tell one friend or call one organization and get the ball rolling. That is the key. You are the key to your own recovery. So really to just share that with someone else out there.
Amazing.
I can't even tell you how validating and incredible this episode has been. And you are the most amazing person for sharing your struggles and story. And it must have been so challenging all these 13, 14 years that you've gone through everything. But to be able to use those challenges and now share that with the world and our listeners and us and me and Dobra and help us through what can save a very challenging situation and just, help us to gain that awareness is life-changing. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode on Spotlight. If you were affected by any of the challenges we have discussed, then please visit www.mtom.org.uk/podcast for guidance on where to find help.
Do you also have a story to share? Be in touch if you'd also like to be a lifeline for others by sharing and empowering women across the world. Podcasts at mtom.org.uk.